All right, welcome back, boys and girls. Welcome back to the series. So this video is going to be very interesting. Today I'm going to introduce hooks to you, and we will talk a lot about hooks, and we will talk about why they are actually awesome and how much you can do very cool stuff with very little code. Before that, I want to get two things out of the way. The first thing is the platform I mentioned in the video before. I had to move that platform to Thinkific. So now the URL will change, and whoever signed up in the other URL will have now, I will re-register them in this platform. So I moved away from Teachable simply because they want to start charging me after 10 students, and I'm okay with that. But then the issue is very little guys actually signed up, and we are almost at 10 now, and I don't want to pay for that, especially because I see that the interest in it is not that big anyway. I still believe it's a better experience than learning on YouTube. Someone commented in the comments below, said that he prefers to work on YouTube. So I will keep both of them running. And if you prefer to do it on this platform, Thinkific, you can do that. They allow me to have unlimited students for free, so I'll keep that running. And if at some point things get bigger, I'll pay for an upgrade and see where that goes. But for now, you can do both. And the second thing I want to talk about is my upload schedule. So I will commit to upload once a week at least. So yep, because someone was asking about that as well. So yeah, once a week, I'll do that, all right? Okay, with that out of the way, let's get into the real thing, yeah? Let's do present and then, okay. So today we will talk about hooks. So if you recall from early on the series, I showed you this graph, right? So we talked about how we are getting data from the API, and then we take this data and we give it into a component called the weather engine, and then that weather engine is going to hold the state of the whole app, and it's going to pass this state as data in terms of props, and props is going to do everything else. So we already talked about this part. Remember how weather card has props. This is the last time we did in the last video where we stopped. It has props and we pass it on to location and all that stuff. But I want to talk about this part here now. So remember, we have a city field or like whatever, just an input field, and that input field is causing a re-render. Now, React will always cause a re-render whenever the state changes. And what we are going to do today is we are going to have a state inside our app, and we are also going to have an input field that is going to use hooks to re-update or update the state, in which case it's going to force a re-render. So this is just the big picture of the whole thing, yeah? So we have a state inside the app, and we are going to use hooks to manage those states. And what I mean by manage is set them and update them based on the input from the user. And whenever we update the state, we are going to have a re-render with the new state. Okay, so I want to go into the basic of hooks. And like I said just now, hooks are a way to manage state. But I also want to talk about what is state. So state is a variable that defines the state of the app at any specific point in time. So your app will have different representation or different data showing or different looks, no matter whatever you want to think about it, just different states. I think state is a good abstract word to describe what we're talking about here. And for this, I just made a very small diagram. So let's just say this is your app, yeah? And then your state will change. There will happen a mutation, or let's call it mutation, or whatever you want to call it, just a change in the state. And if that happens, then the way the app behaves is going to change. I just have an icon here saying that the app is now different. And from that state also, that state can also change once more, and it can go back to its original representation. So the app itself is holding this mutable variable called state, and based on that state, the app state, I guess, the app display or the app behavior will actually change. And a big part of React is how to handle state. So this state is not something that React came up with. This is just, excuse me. This is just one of the expressions that you use in software engineering in general. But React is very good nowadays in handling state with very, very simple code, which is hooks. The first hook here is called the use state, which is common sense. We're just using this state API from React. Now, useState hook will take initial value as an argument, and it returns two things, yeah? it returns the variable itself, and returns the second thing is a setting function. And calling this function forces a re-render in the app. What the hell am I talking about? All right, let's take it slow. So what I said just now is that when you use state, basically, this function, the hook itself, will take a variable. That variable is the initial value of your state. In this case, it's called city, yeah? And then this is destructuring. I hope you really know what this is. But basically means that this function will return two things. It will return a variable, which is city, and it will return another function, which is a function used to update that variable. So as I've written it here, useState will take an initial value, and it will return an array. Inside the array, there is a variable, and there is an updating function. And whenever you call that updating function into your app, that will make a re-render in the app. And this is how the most basic way of handling state in React, using useState hook. So again, useState hook will take an initial value of the state variable. In this case, it's city here in between the parentheses, and it will return an array. This array will hold two things: city, which is the variable, the state variable that we are declaring, and setCity here, which is an updating function. It's the updating function. And then later in your code, you can call up the setCity to change that state variable, and that will always force a re-render in the whole app. So calling the setting function forces a re-render in the app. All right, beautiful. So this is the most basic hook in React. And we will use everything that I've just mentioned just now, but I want to go into another really basic hook as well, and then we can go back to coding. So a second thing we need to talk about when it comes to hook is something called LifeCycle Methods, yeah? So if you don't know anything about React, LifeCycle Methods is a very simple way of describing what happens to the components when basically throughout their life cycle. So whenever the component is rendered into the DOM, is part of the DOM element, that means that the component is being mounted, has already been mounted, yeah? And when the component is taken away from the DOM, that means that the component has been unmounted. And LifeCycle Methods is just a way to handle code that gets executed when the component is mounted and when the component is unmounted. And it's a very simple way to do it right now with hooks, because you don't, like before, you have to use something component will mount, component will unmount, component did mount, and it was good and all, but this right now is just very, very simple. So the hook is called useEffect because these are considered to be side effects. They don't really affect the state, or just like it's a side effect. It happens after the component is mounted, yeah? So that's why useEffect is the hook to handle these lifecycle methods. And the way it works is it handles two codes. It handles a code that will run once the component is mounted, and that code will rerun once any of the dependencies of that hook is changed. And it also holds a return function which handles a code that will be executed if the component is unmounted. Okay, so let me take a step back and re-go over this just in a very slow and organized manner. So what I just said is that useEffect as a hook, it will take a function and it will take an array, yeah? So that function, here is an arrow function that I'm sending, handles a code that will be executed on the client side on the mounting of that component. So whenever that component gets mounted to the DOM, this code will be executed. And it also takes a return of that function, which is another, in this case, I just put another arrow function, and this code will be executed on unmount. So whenever the component is being removed from the DOM, this code will run. And the code that happens inside this bit will rerun every single time one of the variables in the dependency array will change. I understand this is really, really abstract words, but once we put everything into action right now, everything will make sense, I promise. Just hold on with me, okay? So let's go back to our code and try to make sense of what I just mentioned. So this is where we stopped last time. We have 3 cards and we are getting these values from the API and we are logging them into the console. So far so good. This is very simple and the code is there. I hope you understand everything there. If you don't, just go back to the previous video and go through it. It will explain everything on how we got here. Beautiful. Now, what I want to do is I want to declare a variable here using this hook, using the React hook, use state. So what I'm gonna do, I have to import that hook first. So I'm gonna do use state here. So I'm importing use state from React first. And then I'm going to do the same thing I've just explained there. I'm gonna say const city and set city. So like I said, city is the state variable and set city is going to be the function that will update that state variable. Yeah. So this is going to use state, and I'm going to give it an initial value of Sydney AU. So this is just the initial value of city. Beautiful. Now I want to be able to use that initial value to fetch this data and make that request to the API. But now there's a small problem here, is the fact that where we going to fetch that URL is just a string. So I need to be able to change some part of that string, which is this area. And to be able to do that, it's very, very simple in JavaScript. I will take that string away. So Control X in this case, just take it away. And then I'm gonna delete this. And instead of the quote marks, I'm gonna do backticks. So backticks will allow us to jointly include strings and JavaScript variables. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna put the same exact string back again. And instead of this bit here, I'm gonna delete it. I'm gonna use a $sign with 2 brackets, 2 curly braces. And here I'm gonna put city. So what happens here is that I'm using the city variable to form a string and then fetch that string. Okay, that is beautiful. So what I'm gonna do now is that I'm gonna save this and I'm gonna see how that runs. Remember, what we're doing here now is we are fetching this string with the value of Sydney AU, and I'm still logging everything in the console. So let's go back to the browser and okay, and this is not working, and the reason it's not working because I did a typo here. So I'm sorry for that. Let's go back there and everything is working here. So yeah, simply I just made a typo when I typed Sydney. Don't ask me how that happened, but yeah. So this is normal. What feels like is 21 and the temperature is 24. This is normal stuff. And I can change this now to Melbourne, yep, and that will get updated here as well. So 19, 24, I can change this to anything actually. So I can change this to London, GB, and save that. And that will also, yep, 7 degrees, 11 degrees, and so on. Okay, so this is working now. So we have a state variable, but we are setting it manually right now, which is not what I want. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to add an input that will allow the user to set that variable and then run this function again. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have a form. This is really, really simple bit of code. So I'm gonna have just a very simple form here. And inside this form, I will have an input. See, I will have an input. Yep, and that input, there's no need for a closing bracket on that input. Let's just do it that way. And I will also have a button to do the search. And I will also have a button to do the search. And that button will call for search basically. And let's just work on the input first. So in this input, the first thing I need to do here is I'm gonna call the value of this input to always be the city. So whatever value is the city, this is going to be reflected in the input. So if I save this and go back to my browser, and you can see here, this is London is coming back from the value of the city that we have here. If I change this back to Sydney, and refresh this, again, Sydney comes here. So basically, I'm just binding between the value of city and whatever value this input has. Beautiful. Now, the second thing I want to do is whenever the user actually changes this, so I'm going to have something called onChange. Whenever there is a change that happens into that input, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send an arrow function that will update the value of city, because I want to take whatever input the user gives me and update the city variable. Yeah. So I'm gonna do here, I will simply say set city here, and I will give it the value of E is the event, in this case the change event, and I'll just say e.target value. Beautiful. So whatever the city whatever the change happens inside the input here, what happens is we're going to take that targeted value, which is the value that the user has just put, and we're going to update the city with it. So if I go back here and change this, this is probably going to cause an error, and I'm going to explain why now. Yep, exactly. So what happens now is as I was changing, we called setCity the first time I changed the input, right? And whenever I call setCity, React will force a re-render, remember? And when React forces a re-render, this code will be run. And whenever this code is run, I am now requesting a fetch URL with the city just M. Remember, because for example, if I refresh this again, everything is good. But if I take this out and put an M here, so now I have this, I'm sending a request with MEL or M, and that doesn't work. What happens is the API will send me back an empty array, and now what's telling me here is that you can't really find this feels like of undefined, because that response is undefined. The API didn't send back anything. So you want to be able to stop that. So what I will do here is I will simply just stop the data fetching for now. So let me just comment this piece, and we can stop the data fetching for now. And now I can actually change this as I want. So I can do Melbourne AU. Beautiful. And now nothing happens if I click search. Okay. Now let's fix that. So what I want to do now is I want to do, whenever the user actually clicks on search, I want to go and actually fetch whatever value that comes back from the API. So for this, I will do this on click. So whenever you click on that button, what I want to do is I want to run a function, but this function is going to be slightly big to be put like in an arrow function like we did here. So I will actually write a proper function here. So I will do this const handle search. So this is just an arrow function here, and this arrow function is going to execute the following code. Now I will have an E here, which is E stands for event, and this is the click event itself. And the first thing we need to do is call E prevent default. So prevent default will actually prevent the default action that this button was supposed to do in the normal HTML. So I want to prevent that, okay? And after this, I will actually want to take the same exact code and put it inside there. Okay, Prettify just doing weird stuff. And I will uncomment this code right now. And what's going to happen now, whenever we click on the button, first of all, we're going to prevent the default action of that button. And then we are going to run the data function here. Yep. And we are going to console log everything else. Okay, so this function is good. Now I want this function to be executed whenever we do on click. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just take that E, which is the event of the clicking itself, because here, remember that handle search will take one variable here, E, and I will throw this into, I like to think about it this way. I'm just taking the E and I'm throwing it onto the function called handle search, and I'm just like referencing that same E that I just threw into it. So now what happens is when I go back to this code, if I refresh that, nothing happens here because we are not really console logging anything. If you look at this code doesn't get executed until I press on the search button. So let's do that, yeah? Let's go here and click on that search button here. And you can see now this is being locked because once I click on that search button, handle search will happen and data function is going to be executed. So let's take that and change this to Melbourne AU. And what happens now is once I have changed this, wherever I'm changing this, what happens is on change is happening and it's updating the city variable, yeah? But that nothing really happens with the new city value until I press on that button, in which case the data is going to be refetched and then put here again. So you can see here now, this is 19 and 24. Okay, this is very good. So what's going on here is I am able to take input from the user and I'm able to use that input to change whatever request I send to the API, and I'm getting different feedback or different results from the API whenever I actually send requests for different cities, which is exactly what we want to do, yeah? Now, instead of just console logging this stuff, I actually want to be able to use that stuff. Now, think about this for a minute, yeah? Whenever we are changing the city, we get different values for the weather functions, right? So the feels like was 21 for Sydney and it's now 19 and so on. And the temperature is 24 and then now it's 24.18. And if I go to another city, let's just say London, GB, and now it's very different numbers. And of course, some of these cities will be rainy, some of these cities will have clear weather and so on. So things are going to be different, right? Now, if you think about these variables in the same way that you thought about the city itself, you will understand also that those are actually part of the state. So I'm gonna do this in the easiest way possible, and I'm gonna tell you why it's not the greatest way, and we will do it in the real proper way. But the easiest way possible here is I'm going to use the same hook, use state, but with different variables. So I know that I have temp variable, and I'm gonna do the same exact pattern. Temp, set temp with use state, and then let's just give it an empty array, empty string here, because this is gonna be the initial value for it, which we don't want it to be anything. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with the condition here, and I will change this to set condition as well, condition. And you can see these things that our weather card wants, right? The temp and the condition, and then we have the city itself, and then we have country. Okay, now leave the city and country now for a second. The reason is because we already have city here and it's actually Sydney AU, so I don't want to use it for now, but let's just hold on for a second. I'll fix this right now. But to keep going, we need another one const for, so we got the temp, the condition, we got the Sydney, we're gonna use the city, we're using the same one. And let's have another one for country. What's going on with my spelling today? Am I the only one who, when you spend too much time looking at the code, you start wondering why things look the way they look? Anyway, okay, never mind. Maybe I'm just didn't sleep well or whatever. Okay, good. So now we have a hook for every single bit of my state that we want to update. Again, this is not the most optimal way to do it, but this is the easiest way we can do it right now. Now, instead of just getting console logging these values, I want to assign these values to the temp, I want to assign this value to condition, I want to assign this value to country. So instead of doing things that way, what I will do is, remember, whatever happens here is the value that gets executed after the promise is resolved. And we have the promise here as res. If you don't know what I mean, just go back to the previous lecture. I explained it over there. So what will happen here is I will just say, I want to set the condition, the temp, for example. I want to set the temp to this temperature here, to res main.temp. So if I set the temp to this, I'm updating my temp variable here with temp. I'm updating my temp variable here with whatever the API gives me back. And on top of this, instead of using here a real number, like a normal number like this, what I will do is I'm gonna actually use my temp variable. So let's save this and see how this goes. So when you go here, this is the first card. Actually, let me delete the other cards because it's distracting at the moment. So what happens here, I have no value in the temperature, right? But if I click here, what happens is I do the API requests, and once the value comes back, it's being assigned to my temp state, and this temp state is coming here. And remember, this works because whenever I use any updating function, I am forcing a re-render. And that is exactly how reactivity works in React. So if I change this again to London, GB, and press enter, what happens is I am updating city, I'm also updating the temp, and both of them will actually force a re-render in the app, and that re-render will change the background and everything and all that stuff we talked about before. Okay, this is really good. Beautiful. I really hope that this is clear for you. Now, I don't really need this stuff, so I'm not using it anymore, so I can delete this stuff, no need. And I will actually set other stuff as well. So I want to set, sorry, not the city. I want to set the condition. Yep, I want to set the condition. And I don't remember really what the API tells me back, so that's why I always have this tab open. So if I scroll down here to the API response format, what I'm looking for is condition. In this case, it's main. I think it's main. No, it's weather. Yep, weather, and then weather.main. But if you look here, and this part is a little bit tricky, you can see that weather is actually an array. So what I'm going to do, actually, let me hide, yep, that's better. So what I'm going to do is I have to assign the condition to res, that's the response itself, dot weather, but then weather is an array, right? Weather is an array, so I need to look into the first element in the array, which is 0 here, and then dot main. So weather, the first element, which is an object, yeah, and inside that object there is a property called main, and that will be a value there. Beautiful. What else we have here? We have country, set country. I will set the country also to, if you scroll down here a little bit, that's basically res.name. That's very simple, res.name. This one is very simple, and I will actually use my variables here in the weather card that I'm rendering. So instead of using rain here, I will change this to condition. Yes, and I will change this to city for now, and I will tell you why this is not really good. And country to country. Actually, I don't think this is right. Excuse me. This is country here. Yep, this is country. I don't think this is right. Excuse me here. This is going to be the value of the country is going to be res.sys.country. Yes, my apologies. res.sys.country. res.sys.country. Okay. If I save all of this and I go to my React app here, I see that my initial state is nothing, right? Because this is the value that we have assigned for the city variable, the initial value, so it shows up here, but nothing else is there. But if I change this to London, see, whenever I'm changing, it's updating as well, because that's the unchanged variable happening. And if I search now, it gets updated. So I can see it's cloudy and the icon is updating. Beautiful. Everything we discussed before. The icon is updating. The condition is updating. The temperature is updating, and it's really good. If I go to Cairo, Egypt, where I'm from, and change this, so again, it's cloudy. The country is updating. This is the city variable. So it's just copy and paste whatever we put there. And the temperature is 8. Oh yeah, it's winter over there. Let me try something that's actually hot. Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Oh yeah. So it's 32 degrees over there, and it's cloudy as well. Why is everything cloudy? Let me try Calgary, Canada. I want to change the icon. Yes, here we go. It's foggy in Calgary. It's -7 as well. Okay, so we can see everything in the card is working, but this really doesn't make any sense here. This really doesn't look good. So let's fix this. So the first thing I want to do here, it's actually very simple. Instead of just having this as city, I'm just going to copy this and paste it. And I'm going to call this, let's just say this is query. Let's just say this is query. And this is going to be set, sorry, this has to be capital. Set query here. And yeah, let's just put the query there as Sydney.SydneyAU. And the city itself will be empty. And whenever we get a value from the API, I am going to change the city based on this. So I'm going to change the city, and this is the one that's res.name. So the city is going to be updated by the name itself. And whenever we handle this search now, instead of passing city to it, I want to pass query to it. And I don't want this function to be kind of like hard-coded. I want this function to handle whatever I pass to it. So for this, I'm just going to pass a variable here. Let's just call this Q, stands for query, and I'm just going to change this to Q, right? And whenever I actually handle the search, I'm going to search using my query variable. Again, whenever I handle my search, I'm going to search using my query variable. So whenever I click on that button, what's going to happen is I will execute that data function passing the query variable to be put right there, right? Because that's a variable in the function and is being put to formulate the URL. The last thing I need to do here is that the value of the input here is going to be query and not city. And I'm going to consequently also change this to query. So whenever, now this input is only handling the query and everything else is handling the actual weather status, right? So I'll save this code. I will go here again. See, so whenever here, I'm actually showing here the city itself, and you can see all these variables right now are actually empty. So there's nothing here. There's nothing there at all. And we can change that directly by actually just submitting a request there. So whenever we submit a request, the API request is going to happen. And when it comes back, all of these things are going to be populated. Let me change this to something else, London GB, and then that will update as well. So this is perfect. This is really, really good. Before I move on from this video, I actually just want to clean up some things. I know this video is already a bit longer than my usual videos, but hold on with me. Now, remember when I said this is the easiest way to do things, but it's not really the most efficient way to do it. So let's just change it and put it in the easier way, yeah? So instead of using like 1, 2, 3, 4 different use state statements, instead of doing it that way, what I will do is I will actually change this into one. So instead of using all these variables, I'm just gonna declare here one variable, and I will call that weather. And here I will call a setting function called setWeather. And that variable is going to be an array. And this is the trick here. Inside that object, that variable is going to be an object. And inside that object, I'm going to have different stuff. So I will have temp, and I will initialize the value of temp with null. And I will have city, and I will also initialize this with null. I will have condition. Again, I will initialize condition. I will also initialize it with null. And lastly, I will have, I think it's country, right? Yep. Country, I will also initialize this with null. So what's happening here, I am kind of consolidating all my state variables into one variable called weather. But this variable is actually an object that consists of temp and city, condition, and country. And you could think about this in any way you want, man. You can actually use an array here. So instead of doing it that way, I could delete this and I could say, okay, this is not going to be an object, it's going to be an array. And inside this array, it's gonna have, I don't know, temp, it's gonna have this, that, and then you can update this and use it as well. But I think the most common sense way of doing this is just an object. So weather now, which is my state variable, is an object that has different values inside of it. So different properties. So I have the temp property, the city property, the condition property, and the country property. Okay, this is really good. Now, instead of also doing this in so many ways like that, what I will do is I will set the weather now. So this is my state. And again, all you have to do is simply just update this. So I'll assign different values for it. So I will just copy this and paste it here. And instead of the temp being null, I will just give it the same thing. I'm just literally copying and pasting now. The temp, so the temp will be res.main.temp, and the city will be res.name, and the condition will be okay, it doesn't see, but what was it? Res.weather, the 0, and then .main, beautiful. And lastly, the country will be res.country, right? Lastly, the country will be res.country, beautiful. And these are all not relevant anymore. Take them out. Oopsie. So take all of this out. Yep. So right now I'm just setting the weather. And let me check quickly. Yes. And then whenever we want to access the temp here, what will happen is instead of just using temp, I'm just using weather.temp. So it's the temp that's inside weather. Again, it's the condition inside weather. It's the weather, the city inside weather, and the country inside weather too. Okay, this is all good. If I save this, everything should work as expected. So I click search, beautiful. So this is just, doesn't really make any difference on the user experience side, but once your code is more readable, you are doing a better job, man. Trust me, you're writing code for yourself, not for the machine. You're writing code for your future self and for other developers. Just keep this in mind. It's very, very important. It will save you a ton of frustration. I'm just remembering my frustrated days. So yeah. Okay, this is so far so good. Now, another problem I want to face here is the fact if I refresh this, what happens is I don't like this. I don't like this to be an empty card like that. So what I want to do is I want to fetch some stock data that will happen once the weather card component is mounted to the DOM. And if you recall from my previous presentation here, the way to do that is by using use effect. That's why I introduced both of them. So let's do that. It's actually very, very simple. So don't really worry about it at all. So what I'll do here is I'm going to use effect here and hopefully auto import from React. So, okay, this is not cool. I don't want it that way. Let's just import it here. This is use effect here. Oopsie, use effect. Beautiful. So I'm using effect. And again, use effect will take a function. remember? And it will take a dependency array. It's very important, a function and a dependency array, yeah? Now for this function, I will just do an arrow function here. Oopsie, an arrow function here. And in this arrow function, what I will do is very, very, very simple. I will simply take the same exact code that I execute there, but I want it to be executed once I have loaded the component, and I will leave everything as it is. So I have the query, and once the component is being loaded, this function will run and will update everything using Sydney AU as a query for the API. If I save this and go back to here, perfect, that's it. If I refresh this, perfect. Again, let me refresh it. Now it updates automatically. So whenever this component is being mounted, it gets the data for Sydney, which is my default value for the query. And later I can change this to London GB or whatever, and everything will update again. And then this doesn't really change because, sorry, this doesn't go back to Sydney because that code here doesn't really run ever again because its dependency array is 0. So this is a very, very useful pattern. This code will only run once, and will only run once whenever the component is mounted. It will never run again because the dependency array is empty. Let me just, to show you what this can be, if I put weather here, so what will happen now is going to be, actually I think this will cause an error because we are rerunning this too many times. Let me just try. What happens now is I'm telling React that if the weather changes, rerun the query again. Yeah, if the weather changes, rerun the query again. So let me try that. What happens now, oh, I didn't save. Let me save that first and go here. Okay, so what happens now if I do this as London GP? Once I search, I'm going to update the weather. But once I update the weather, it's going to try to rerun that again. So yeah, it's going to work. Okay, beautiful. Let me try something else. Melbourne AU. Okay, so it's working. But now, did you see just what happened now? It's like, it's kind of hesitating between two things because it's kind of like rerunning the whole thing again. Remember, whenever weather changes, I am actually rerunning the query again. So let me try this again by doing London. Yes, exactly. So now it can property temp of undefined because this is kind of a loop. That's what I was expecting because right now I am, whenever I change this, I'm changing the query, and the query, whenever I press enter, the query is actually changing, getting new value for weather, and weather will actually rerun the query again. So it's kind of a loop. So this will have to stop. Okay, beautiful. So now everything works properly and everything works very well. Now, and this is, I think, so far, I think you guys have seen really, really a big chunk of what makes React reactive. So this is exactly what makes React reactive in 2020, basic hooks. It's all about hooks. So we have introduced now two very, very, very important hooks, which is the use state hook by defining part of your state and actually using that state to change the way your app reacts based on user input and other stuff. And you also looked at how to handle the events in React. We also looked at how to take input from the user and use that to update our variables and so on. And then also we looked at a pattern here that's very useful in which the code will only run once when the component is mounted. I don't want to make this video any longer. In the next video, I will talk to you guys about how to handle errors. Because if I do something, let's just say put my name there and search for it. Of course, there's no city under my name. So that now means that the weather is actually an empty array because it hasn't been set, because there's no response back from the API, because you see here, there's an error from the API. So we are not doing any error handling here at all, which I really don't like. So we are not doing any error handling. We are not doing any, if I change this to London GP, hold on, keep in mind when I click search, it just flashes like that. So there's no error handling, there's no loading states. So there's no loading kind of like a trigger or like spinner or something like that. And I don't like both of these things. And that is exactly what we will be fixing in the next video. Like this video if you like it, dislike this video if you disliked it. Please let me know if you have opinions about my teaching style and about the content in the comments below. I would love to see you guys in this platform. I'm just trying this out. If it's better for you guys, let me know. If it's worse, Also, let me know in the comments below. Don't be shy, just tell me what you think. Thank you very much for everything, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.